You know the exact physical sensation. Your jaw tightens, your pulse accelerates. You feel a sudden, violent spike in your heart rate. Someone standing right in front of you has just said something so incredibly stupid, so fundamentally devoid of basic logic, that your brain temporarily short-circuits. You stare at them. The words hang in the air like a toxic gas. In that microsecond, a brutal war begins inside your mind. The urge to correct them is overwhelming. It feels like a biological necessity. You open your mouth, you prepare the facts, you assemble the logic, and right there, in that exact moment, you lose the game before it even begins. You have just encountered the fool, and you are about to step willingly into their trap. You think you are stepping in to provide clarity. You believe you are the voice of reason. You are not. Look closer at your own motives. Why is your chest tight? Why are your palms sweating? Why does it feel absolutely critical that this person understands exactly why they are wrong? Let us dissect the ugly truth you hide from yourself. You do not argue to educate the fool. You do not care about their intellectual growth. You argue to soothe the weak version of yourself. That weak version is your ego. The ego is fragile, paranoid, and constantly starved for validation. When the fool speaks their weaponized ignorance, your ego perceives it as a direct threat to your reality. The weak version demands immediate defense. It screams at you to prove your superiority. Every time you try to use logic to crush stupidity, you're implicitly admitting that the stupidity has power over you. You're begging for an acknowledgement that you are right. You're handing them the keys to your emotional state. Think about the mechanics of a debate. A true exchange of ideas requires two rational actors, but the fool does not operate on rationality. When you deploy facts, data, and historical precedent, you are speaking a language they do not even possess. Yet you keep pushing. Your voice gets louder, your tone gets sharper, you start using analogies, you repeat yourself. Look at you. Look at the desperation. You're pouring your high-grade mental energy into a black hole of ignorance. You're burning your own resources to construct a bridge that the other side has no intention of crossing. The fool watches you scramble. They see you working hard, getting frustrated, losing your composure. They have successfully pulled you down from your pedestal. There is a brutal, ancient law of human behavior. Stepping into the mud to wrestle a pig gets you both dirty. But here is the psychological catch. The pig likes it. The mud is their natural habitat. They thrive in the filth of chaos, irrationality, and noise. When you descend into that mud, you strip away your dignity. You sacrifice your mental clarity. You become covered in the exact same filth. To the outside observer, there is no difference between the genius and the idiot when they are both screaming in the dirt. You thought you were demonstrating your intellect. Instead, you proved your absolute lack of emotional discipline. Contrast this desperate, sweating need to be right with the ultimate power play, the cold, unbothered power of silence. The reader, the master of their own psychology, hears the stupidity and simply stops. They do not twitch, they do not sigh. They hold dead, unblinking eye contact. They let the stupid statement echo in the empty room. They let the silence become heavy, suffocating, and absolute. They look at the fool not as a threat, but as a fascinating, tragic specimen. Silence in the face of stupidity is not defeat. It is a psychological guillotine. It severs the interaction instantly. It denies the fool the friction they desperately crave. It starves your ego and feeds your power. The weak version of you wants to scream for attention. The powerful version of you whispers that they are not worth the breath. When you refuse to argue, you refuse to be brought down to their level. You create an impenetrable psychological fortress. Niccolo Machiavelli laid bare this brutal truth centuries ago. He stated, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. If you surround yourself with fools, if you engage with fools, if you lower your intellect to battle fools, you become indistinguishable from them. Your value is determined by what you tolerate. By arguing, you tolerate the absurd. By arguing, you validate the worthless. Drop this in the comments. My piece is worth more than their validation." You assemble the perfect sequence of words. You construct an argument so airtight, so deeply rooted in undeniable reality, that any functioning human brain would have no choice but to accept it. You lay this masterpiece of reasoning on the table. You wait for the realization to wash over their face. You expect the light bulb to turn on, and nothing happens. You blink. They stare back at you, not with comprehension, not with curiosity. They look at you with a dull, aggressive blankness. You have just hit the brick wall. This is the exact moment the illusion of shared reality shatters into pieces. You assume that because you are both speaking the exact same language, you are operating under the same rules of human cognition. This is a fatal, costly miscalculation. You're trying to pick a steel lock with a mathematical formula. You're pouring your high-grade intellectual capital straight into the logic void. The brick wall does not use words to discover the truth. They do not use words to build a bridge of mutual understanding. They use words as blind, blunt instruments to protect their own arrogance. Their position is not a structured fortress, built on verified facts and historical data. It is a shallow, muddy trench, dug out of pure, unadulterated emotion. Here is the ironclad psychological rule that will save you thousands of hours of wasted mental life. You cannot logic someone out of a position they did not logic themselves into. Process that sentence deeply. If their core belief was born from deep insecurity, tribal thinking, or a fragile pride, your immaculate data points are completely useless. When you present factual evidence to the brick wall, their brain does not process it as helpful information. Their brain processes it as a literal physical attack. Their amygdala fires, their biological defenses lock down tight. The more precise your argument is, the more fiercely they will defend their comfortable delusion. You think you're turning on a light in a dark room. They feel like you are burning their retinas. Look closely at the behavior of the explainer. The explainer is entirely weak. They stand there, desperate, reorganizing their facts, changing their tone, trying to find a brand new angle. They are literally begging to be understood by a mind that is fundamentally closed for business. The explainer treats their own intellect like cheap promotional flyers, handing them out to random strangers who immediately throw them into the dirty street. The explainer is driven by a childish belief that if they just find the right combination of syllables, the other person will magically transform into a rational adult. Now look at the strategist. The strategist views their intellectual energy as a finite, priceless resource. They hoard their cognitive capital. They do not distribute it to the unworthy. When the strategist encounters a mind governed by sheer arrogance and blind emotion, they do not reach for a better argument. They reach for the exit. They recognize the logic void instantly, and they step gracefully around it. Why should you exhaust your highest level cognitive functions for someone who is fiercely committed to misunderstanding you? The brutal answer is, you should not. To argue with a brick wall is to insult your own intelligence. It is a profound act of self-disrespect. You're taking the most valuable asset you possess, your time and your mental clarity, and you're setting it on fire just to see the brief glow in an empty room. The ancient Stoic philosopher Epictetus understood the absolute futility of this exchange over 2 millennia ago. He mapped the exact psychological blueprint for handling these encounters. He commanded, "If anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, 'He was ignorant.'" Notice the surgical, cold precision of that specific response. There is no debate. There is no desperate counterattack. There is no emotional spiraling to set the record straight. There is just a cold, factual categorization of the other person. They are ignorant. That is their permanent condition. It is not your problem to solve. The moment you stop trying to cure their ignorance is the exact moment you reclaim your absolute authority. You permanently withdraw your energy. You let them exist alone in their self-imposed darkness. You let their irrationality starve to death in a vacuum. Do not offer a feast of profound reason to those who only know how to consume garbage. Drop this in the comments. I do not cast pearls before swine. You walk away thinking you survived a failure of communication. You did not. You survived an attempted psychological robbery. You fundamentally misunderstood the game being played. You looked at the shouting match, the circular logic, and the stubborn denial, and you thought the goal was to find the truth. The goal was never the truth. The goal was a harvest. You assumed they were fighting for a principle. They were hunting for your pulse. Welcome to the hidden layer of the interaction. You're dealing with the emotional vampire. This is a predator that operates in broad daylight, using everyday conversation as a hunting ground. The fool does not actually care about the topic you're debating. The topic is just the bait. Politics, relationships, unwashed dishes, or workplace protocols, it is all entirely irrelevant. They do not want to change your mind. They want to alter your baseline emotional state. They want to watch your hands shake. They want to hear your voice crack. They want to see the exact second your composure shatters, because in that precise moment, they own your reality. This is the exact mechanism of emotional vampirism. The fool lives in a permanent state of internal chaos. They lack the psychological machinery to self-regulate. They cannot generate their own confidence, their own peace, or their own validation, so they must siphon power from a living host. When they provoke you, they are plugging a parasite directly into your nervous system. Every time your heart rate spikes, every time you take a deep, frustrated breath to explain yourself one more time, you're transferring your high-value life force directly into their empty vessel. They consume your distress to medicate their own insecurity. Watch the trap snap shut. They will say something profoundly absurd, something so aggressively stupid and disconnected from reality that it forces a visceral reaction out of you. This is not an accident. This is a calculated psychological technique known as reactive abuse. They will poke your deepest insecurities. They will twist your words into grotesque caricatures of what you actually said. They will relentlessly push your buttons until your biological alarms ring and you finally snap. You raise your voice, you lash out, you lose control, and then the trap locks. The fool suddenly goes calm. They look at you, wide-eyed and innocent, and they weaponize your reaction against you. They tell you that you are acting crazy. They ask why you are being so aggressive. They have successfully dragged you down into their chaotic, filthy underworld, and now they are beating you with a lifetime of experience. You are entirely disoriented. You started this interaction trying to explain a simple fact, and you ended up desperately defending your own sanity. They made you the villain in a stage play that they wrote, directed, and produced. Look at the physical state of the reader in this scenario. You're frantic, you're exhausted, your chest is tight, your adrenaline is surging, and your mind is racing to defend yourself against a phantom. You're wrestling in the mud with a creature that loves the dirt. You're playing a rigged game where the only prize is your own nervous breakdown. You gave them the exact emotional currency they demanded, and you impoverished yourself in the process. Now, completely erase that weak identity. Step into the architecture of the untouchable self. The untouchable self sees the hidden game instantly. When the emotional vampire begins their provocation, the pacing of the entire world slows down. The untouchable self watches the erratic behavior, the baiting, and the absurd accusations, but they do not internalize a single syllable. They look at the fool not as a peer, not as a threat, but as a biological specimen acting out a predictable programming. When you become the untouchable self, you look at their emotional outbursts the exact same way a rational adult observes a toddler throwing a tantrum on the floor of a supermarket. You do not get on the floor and scream back at the toddler. You do not try to logically debate the toddler about the nuances of grocery shopping. You stand above the chaos. You observe the flailing limbs, the tears, and the desperate cries for attention with cold, clinical detachment. You realize that their internal storm has absolutely nothing to do with your value. It is simply noise. The emotional vampire expects resistance. They crave your defense. When you offer zero resistance, you starve the parasite. When you refuse to be offended, their provocation hits a reinforced steel wall and drops harmlessly to the ground. You do not flinch. You do not defend your character. You let the silence stretch. You look right through them. You let their desperate need for drama echo back into their own empty skull. The power vacuum they tried to create instantly collapses on top of them. The Italian diplomat Niccolo Machiavelli decoded the supreme law of psychological warfare. He wrote, "He who controls his own mind controls his enemies." Your emotional regulation is your ultimate armor. The moment you decide that your internal peace is vastly more valuable than their fragile ego, the invisible strings are cut. You're no longer a puppet dancing to the rhythm of their insecurities. You become an impenetrable fortress. They can scream at the gates, they can throw themselves against the stone, but they cannot force you to lower the bridge. The game ends the exact second you refuse to play. Drop this in the comments. I deny them my reaction. You have cut the emotional feed, but the predator is still standing in front of you. They are waiting for the clash. They are escalating, cornering you, begging for the friction that validates their miserable existence. Silence is your armor, but armor only absorbs the blow. Now, you must learn to forge your weapon. What do you do when the provocateur traps you in a physical space? At a hostile family dinner, in a fluorescent lit office, or pinned against the wall by your own ingrained politeness? The amateur tries to escape by explaining. The amateur desperately says, "Let us just agree to disagree." Do you understand what that phrase actually means? It is a plea for mercy. It is a weak negotiation. It tells your opponent that you are overwhelmed and you are asking them for permission to retreat. The dominant self never asks for permission to end a battle. The dominant self executes a tactical strike that leaves the opponent swinging at ghosts and collapsing under their own weight. Enter the psychological mechanism of the dead-end strategy. You must understand the fundamental architecture of an argument. The fool's entire psychological framework relies entirely on your resistance. They need a solid wall to push against so they can feel their own strength. If you defend your character, you become the wall. If you attack their broken logic, you become the wall. If you display even a micro-expression of annoyance, you become the wall. To completely break their mind, you must remove the wall the exact moment they throw their hardest punch. You do not fight, you agree. This is not the agreement of the defeated. This is the weaponized agreement of the untouchable. You are not conceding a point of true reality. You are shutting down their simulation. When a maniac screams at you on the street that the sky is made of green copper, you do not pull out a scientific journal on atmospheric light refraction to prove them wrong. You nod, you step aside, and you let them scream at the clouds. You must apply this exact biological detachment to the provocateur in your personal and professional life. Picture the scenario with absolute clarity. The fool is winding up. They are throwing their most absurd, disrespectful accusation directly at your chest. They are waiting for your face to flush with indignation. They expect the biological alarm bells to force you into a frantic defense. Here is the protocol. You do not blink. You do not clench your jaw. You do not cross your arms. You hold unbroken, dead eye contact. You let a full 2 seconds of suffocating silence pass. You let the tension peak until it becomes physically uncomfortable for them. And then, with a voice completely devoid of adrenaline, a voice as cold and flat as a concrete floor, you deliver the kill shot. You look them dead in the eyes and say, "You are absolutely right." Stop. Do not add a single syllable. Do not say "you're right, but." The word "but" instantly reopens the arena. It invites them back into the ring. The phrase must stand alone in the silence. "You're absolutely right." Then, you physically turn your back and you walk away. The psychological devastation of this maneuver is absolute. It is a total system failure for the fool. You have just agreed with them, which technically means they won the argument. Yet, they feel entirely hollow. A massive power vacuum suddenly opens up in their chest. They did not get the prize. They did not get your anger, your tears, your frustration, or your frantic submission. They got a cold mirror reflecting their own massive irrelevance. By agreeing with them so easily, without a trace of emotion, you communicate a devastating truth. You signal that their opinion is so incredibly worthless that it does not even warrant the biological calories required to dispute it. You have turned their greatest attack into a profound humiliation. This is how you make them choke on their own toxicity. You deprive them of the conflict they need to survive. You leave them standing in a room, holding a loaded weapon with absolutely nothing to shoot at. Their momentum carries them right over the cliff. They built a trap and you agreed to step into it, only to reveal the trap was entirely imaginary. They are forced to swallow the exact poison they spent hours preparing for you. They will likely try to chase you. They will attempt to reignite the fire by throwing a secondary insult as you walk away. Do not look back. If you look back, you surrender the dominance you just established. Let their final insult bounce off your back like a plastic toy thrown against a battleship. This is the highest form of psychological superiority. The Stoic Emperor Marcus Aurelius outlined this exact discipline of supreme emotional control when he wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." You completely refuse to descend into their filth. You refuse to adopt their chaotic breathing, their raised voice, and their desperate need to be right. You refuse to become the ugly monster they desperately need you to be just to justify their own brokenness. You are no longer the victim of their chaos. You have become the dominant self. You are the architect of the interaction. You control the thermostat of the room. When you weaponize your agreement, you strip away the only leverage the provocateur ever possessed. You grant them the empty, meaningless victory of cheap words, while you walk away holding the ultimate prize of complete and total self-mastery. They are left screaming into the void. Drop this in the comments. My agreement is my blade. You have turned your back. You have left them drowning in the silence of your absolute agreement. But severing the emotional cord is only the mechanical first step. Victory is not merely escaping the trap. True psychological dominance requires a complete recalculation of what you are actually fighting to protect. Look at the clock. Look at the calendar hanging on your wall. Force yourself to count the hours, the days, the weeks you have burned to ash trying to educate the stubbornly blind. Think of the sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, replaying imaginary debates against people who do not even possess the capacity for logic. You were not just losing arguments, you were being robbed blind. Welcome to the apex economy of human existence, the economy of attention. Time and mental bandwidth are not abstract concepts. They are the ultimate irreplaceable currencies of power. Every single morning, you wake up with a strictly finite reservoir of cognitive energy. You only have so much focus to allocate before the biological battery depletes. The peasant understands this dynamic on a parasitic subconscious level. The fool produces nothing. They build nothing. They exist in a perpetual state of psychological poverty. Because their own lives are utterly devoid of momentum, they have nothing of value to lose. When they provoke you, they are not trying to exchange ideas or seek the truth. They are executing a calculated heist. They are trying to siphon your premium mental capital to inflate their bankrupt reality. When you stop to argue with them, you voluntarily open up the vault. You trade your high-value focus for their low-value noise. The mathematics of this behavioral exchange are sickening. Calculate the true cost. A 15-minute argument with an idiot does not cost you 15 minutes. It costs the hour of residual adrenaline that poisons your bloodstream afterward. It costs the degraded focus when you attempt to return to your actual work. It costs the psychological exhaustion that spills over into your evening, stealing your presence from the people who actually matter. You're quite literally paying for their insecurity with your own potential. Observe the behavioral contrast. The loser squanders this irreplaceable currency on trivial battles in the dirt. They lower their crown, step into the mud, and fight to the death over pennies in the gutter. They believe that defending their ego against a peasant makes them strong. The sovereign self operates on an entirely different plane of reality. The sovereign self understands that the heavy iron gates of the castle must remain locked against the barking of the mob outside. You do not explain the architecture of the sky to someone who refuses to look up. You simply leave them in the dark. The amateur believes the argument is the battlefield. The master knows the argument is deliberate distraction from the only campaign that actually matters. Niccolo Machiavelli laid bare the psychology of ultimate ruthless focus when he wrote, "A prince must have no other objective, no other thought, nor take up any profession but that of war and its methods." Do not misunderstand the nature of this war. Your war is not with the aggressively incompetent co-worker trying to trigger you. Your war is not with the loud, ignorant relative at the dinner table. Those are ghosts, illusions designed to pull you off your path. Your only war is the relentless, unforgiving construction of your own dominion. Your war is the extraction of your highest possible potential. Every single second you spend trying to fix a fool is an act of supreme treason against your own empire. You must begin to view your mental energy with extreme territorial jealousy. Put a premium on your focus so unimaginably high that the peasant cannot even comprehend the price tag. You must treat your mind like an impenetrable fortress. If someone brings chaos, they do not even make it past the outer courtyard. If they demand your energy through provocation, you starve them out. You let them starve while you feast on the momentum of your own uninterrupted progress. When you fully internalize the immense, terrifying value of your own time, the urge to argue evaporates instantly. It is replaced by a cold, magnificent indifference. You watch their frantic, desperate attempts to engage you, and you feel absolutely nothing but a sovereign detachment. You realize that you're simply too busy building your empire to notice the small stones they are throwing at your massive walls. Drop this in the comments. My attention is a luxury they cannot afford. There is a precise, terrifying threshold you cross the moment you stop defending your ego. It is the exact second you realize that intentionally letting a fool be wrong is the ultimate manifestation of power. For decades, you operated under a catastrophic psychological delusion. You believed that if someone walked away with the last word, they won the interaction. You believed that leaving an accusation unanswered was a glaring signal of weakness. You thought your silence would be interpreted as surrender. So you stayed in the dirt. You fought back. You explained your position. You bled out your premium cognitive reserves trying to force a willfully blind person to describe colours. You handed them the pen and allowed them to dictate your emotional state. No longer. You have stepped out of the reactive shell of the reader and assumed the cold, calculating role of the architect of self. The architect does not care about the optical illusion of the argument. The architect only cares about the structural integrity of the empire. Look closely at the profound behavioural contrast. The amateur desperately needs the idiot to understand the truth. The master understands that the idiot's ignorance is their own lifelong punishment, not a project to be solved. When you intentionally let the fool think they won, you execute a brilliant surgical manoeuvre. You hand them a completely meaningless plastic trophy, and while they are busy lifting it into the air, you walk away with the actual prize. You walk away with your time, your focus, your unshakable peace. You no longer care if they strut around claiming victory. Let them. Let them marinate in the absolute delusion of their own superiority. Their false triumph is the incredibly cheap tax you pay to permanently remove them from your atmosphere. Notice exactly what happens to them when you suddenly cut the oxygen of your attention. They do not instantly stop. They escalate. They pound on the heavy glass of your indifference. They throw out wilder accusations. They beg for the friction of your resistance. They need you to push back, because your pushback is the only thing proving they exist. But you offer them absolutely nothing. No anger, no frustration, no desperate need to correct the record. Just a cold, blank stare that strips them to the bone. Look at their face when you refuse to engage. The frantic desperation to pull you back down into the mud is palpable. They are suffocating in their own irrelevance. By doing absolutely nothing, you inflict the deepest psychological wound possible. You erase them. As you hold your ground, their voice begins to lose its shape. Their provocations lose their sting. Without your energy to anchor them, they dissolve from a tangible threat into a hollow echo. You watch them fade entirely into the ghost. A meaningless apparition haunting a battlefield you have already abandoned. This is the heavy armour of indifference. It is entirely bulletproof because it offers absolutely zero surface area for their weapons to strike against. You can never lose a game you permanently refuse to play. The Roman philosopher Seneca understood the fatal danger of engaging in every petty conflict placed in front of you. He wrote, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere. If you fight every minor battle, if you reply to every manufactured slight, if you stop your carriage to kick every barking dog on your path, you will never reach your destination. You will lose the war before you even draw your sword. Do not mistake indifference for a passive state. Indifference is a highly aggressive, deeply territorial psychological weapon. It is the total, unilateral withdrawal of your validation. You're looking them dead in the eye and silently communicating that their existence simply does not register on your radar. You no longer try to control their perception of you. Let them fundamentally misunderstand you. Let them tell terrible, fabricated stories about you to people who do not matter. It changes absolutely nothing about the reality you're building. You have completely severed the cord. You have locked down the vault of your attention. You're moving forward with a cold, terrifying velocity, leaving their desperate noise behind in the dust. The argument is over, not because it was mutually resolved, but because you swept the pieces off the board entirely. You leave them stranded in the void, choking on their own words, while you walk away in absolute deafening silence. Drop this in the comments. I am untouchable in my silence.